Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to this video where I'm gonna be reviewing the brand new Insta360 One RS and hopefully giving you a much better idea on whether or not you wanna buy it. Let's do it. So I've spent the past month or so testing this camera out in a bunch of different places. I put it through its paces, as every single YouTube review ever would say. I did a bunch of filming with this thing, everything from FPV to POV to just normal shots, all the way to their 360 lens. I was actually super excited to test this camera out because as an FPV pilot, I'm super hungry to find a camera that takes down the post-processing stabilization time. Whether that's in camera or with post, basically the only way we're able to get super stable FPV footage at the time is with post-processing stabilization software that takes a really long time. Right now my workflow process is to basically film on the GoPro unstabilized because even internal GoPro stabilization isn't that good compared to RealSteady. So I take those clips and then I plop them into my computer and use RealSteady to stabilize them. And basically what RealSteady is a desktop application that you can take super shaky footage, put it through the software, and it becomes really, really smooth. Once I get the footage downloaded onto my computer, it usually takes about 20 to 40 minutes for RealSteady to process a clip, which is super time consuming. So I'm looking for a camera that has that same wizard-like stabilization. And with the One RS, you can actually shoot in camera or in post as well. First off, I wanna give you some background on this camera. This is the second generation of Insta360's GoPro-y type camera in this style. The first one being the Insta360 One R. What's awesome about this camera is it's super modular, so you can go from an action type camera, or you can, boom, take it apart, completely change the lens, and this becomes a 360 camera. The entire thing is super modular, so you can actually take this entire thing apart. Now it's a rear-facing screen, so you can take this off, flip the camera around, and now you have a dropped camera. And now, boom, you have a selfie style camera as well. It's obviously not quite as easy as the GoPro or Osmo Action, which just have both facing screens, but it is nice to have that flexibility. For me, I've only really used it on like the rear facing configuration. And honestly, when I'm shooting on GoPro as well, I turn off the front screen because I just don't use it. So it didn't really change anything for me. Right off the bat, I want to talk about some of the capabilities of the non-360 lens. So this camera shoots at 4K 60 with internal stabilization, 4K 30 when you use the post stabilization, shoots at 2.7K 100, 1080 200, and then it actually has a pretty cool 6K widescreen mode. And in general, settings wise, I'm super impressed with how many things you can change and adjust. So you can shoot in full manual and adjust the sharpness, shoot in flat, and like I said before, turn the stabilization off and do it in post. The fact that you can change the sharpness is actually a massive thing because that's what really gives action cameras that like GoPro-y sharpness look. So if you're able to adjust that, it improves your footage dramatically. GoPro does the same thing where they have the sharpness super high automatically, so I always just turn that down. Here's a few more quick examples of footage that I've shot on the camera. So far, my favorite modes to shoot in have been 4K 60 with the internal stabilization, and then 4K 30 in post for FPV shots. The big question here, especially with FPV, is the stabilization. In my opinion, if you're shooting FPV, you don't want to use the internal stabilization because the post stabilization is just that good. I'm actually insanely impressed by it. Unfortunately, you can't shoot 4K 60 if you use post stabilization though. I was hoping the internal stabilization would be a little bit better, and it is a big improvement from the last camera, but it's still not up to par to my RealSteady workflow. Here's a quick example of a longer, more complicated technical line processed on the post-processing software Insta360 Studio. As you can see, like I said, it's really, really solid. Here's a quick side-by-side so you can just see the difference. And then after that, I wanted to do a quick test of it versus the GoPro and RealSteady combo. So I tried to fly basically like the exact same line with both cameras. And as you can see, the stabilization is actually really solid. Personally, I haven't seen any other camera software combo that gets even close to RealSteady, so seeing this from Insta360 Studio is really exciting. As far as the interface goes in Insta360 Studio, I'm actually really stoked on it. It's way more intuitive than RealSteady. RealSteady sort of looks like some old Windows application, whereas Insta360 is like brand new and current. And it has a bunch more flexibility when it comes to that post-processing. With RealSteady, you basically throw it in there and it exports the clip automatically with no added settings. But with Insta360 Studio, you can completely change the field of view from narrower shots all the way to full field of view. On top of that, the app actually offers something that you usually have to buy a separate program like Neat Video for, and that's noise reduction, which basically takes footage that is pretty noisy. Like, you a lot of times see this in indoor footage where the just lighting situation isn't very nice, and it takes that and it automatically applies correction for that, so you can export a version without noise. I did a little test on how stabilization times compare to, and the export time is actually a little bit better with the Insta360 Studio as well. And when you're stabilizing like 20 clips from a trip, that's super helpful. So as far as the stabilization and post-processing power, I've really got to hand it to Insta360. And what's really cool is you can actually batch select all your clips and stabilize them at the same time. RealSteady is like, you stabilize one clip, wait, stabilize another clip, wait. So this just makes that whole process so much easier. Now I want to talk about the footage itself. It's honestly pretty solid. The colors are good, especially when you shoot in flat and then recolor afterwards. But I spent a lot of time shooting on vivid settings because that's what Insta360 recommends. Something I would recommend is locking your white balance settings. I usually set mine to 5500. So after all these tests, what do I personally recommend as far as the best settings go? In my opinion, the best setting to shoot FPV on are as follows. So I'd shoot in 4K 30, unstabilized, color vivid, sharpness low, white balance 5500, shutter speed fixed at double your frame rate, so 1/60. Just make sure to use ND filters to get that super crispy motion blur. Then just set your ISO to whatever you need after that. Just try and keep that ISO as low as possible. If you're shooting POV or something random like underwater, I would definitely just turn on the stabilization in camera and go with 4K 60. All the other settings would stay the same. Before we move on to the 360 lens, I want to give you a couple quick examples of photos I took on this thing. It's actually a 48 megapixel camera. Personally, I don't use action cameras for that many situations, but I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. Next up, I wanna talk about the entire other side of this camera, which is the 360 mode. Like I said, the primary thing that I shoot is FPV, and normally you wouldn't use a 360 camera for that, but I obviously wanted to test it out because if you do it right, you can actually use it in some really cool ways. Now that you're here, settings-wise, it's pretty simple. I'd recommend shooting at 5.7K 30. If you go lower than that, like shooting in 4K, it'll lead to a pretty dramatic loss in quality. Here's a few examples of 360 shots that I took. It uses the same invisible selfie stick technology as other Insta360 cameras, so you can get those super cool, like fake FPV drone shots. And then in post on the app or in the desktop studio, you can completely reframe everything. Then of course I had to try it on the FPV drone. And typically I wouldn't shoot like this on the FPV drone, especially since it's mounted super low, but I just wanted to test it out and see what we got. And it actually could be a pretty useful tool if you're shooting something that's maybe like behind the camera, or you just want the flexibility to kind of reframe your footage. Another cool thing with the 360 footage is you can actually use horizon lock to completely lock off the horizon. So no matter where the drone goes, the horizon stays completely level. And while you're editing 360 footage in Insta360 Studio, it's actually super intuitive as far as keyframing goes. There's a bunch of different transitions you can do. I'm not gonna get super into depth into this side of things because I just don't shoot 360 footage that much, so I'm not an expert on it. But even for someone who isn't really into it, it was pretty easy to do. Another thing this camera has is active HDR, which does a great job of preserving shadows as well as highlights. So in conclusion, what are my final thoughts about this camera? I really think this is a solid camera, especially comparing it to the first version. Insta360 did a great job of really upgrading this thing. When you compare the processing time from RealSteady to flow state, it's actually a lot faster and much more intuitive when you use Insta360 Studio with flow state. So anyways, guys, I really hope this gives you a better idea on what to expect from this camera and hopefully kind of educated you on whether or not you want to buy this thing. If you do, there's a link down in the description. And I just wanted to end this video with a quick sequence of some of my favorite shots that I've taken on this camera, followed by a really cute picture of a penguin. Subscribe if you want to see more cute penguins. But anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.